in the university, which undertook research with about 150 PhD students. So I have, over the years, acquired some useful experience, having graduated about 55 PhD students myself. So without further ado, I would start the seminar on research methods. I must say, currently, I'm supervising 2 PhD students at NAS in the Department of Mining and Process Engineering. So it's something that we do every day. Okay. Today, I'm going to talk to you about research projects. For those of you in the 4th year, you might also do design projects as well. Whatever I say is useful for both research and design projects. The seminar is going to be given in 2 halves. The first half will take 45 minutes with 15 minutes question time at the end and 10 minutes break before we do the second half. Why do we need to do research and design projects? Based on our curriculum and syllabus set for getting a degree, either undergraduate degree or PhD degree. We need to do that as part of the fulfillment of the requirements to educate at the tertiary level to get a bachelor, a master's, or PhD degree. And research projects are required to be undertaken by 4th year undergraduates and both master's and PhD postgraduates doing higher degree courses by research or partly by research, because some students do masters without doing research, only coursework. But what we're talking about is, even if you're doing masters, spending about a quarter to a half of your time doing research. Now, this forms part of research-informed education in terms of teaching, learning, and training graduates for the industry. Now, I'm going to go quickly through the mandate that we have to make sure students are engaged in the research during their training at the bachelor, master's, and the PhD levels, because that mandate is directly linked with the expected graduate quality or attributes indicators. For example, if I take the classical graduate attributes expected for engineering students, then I can particularize about 11 of them, but I'm not going to go through all 11 of them. I'll summarize in about 7 or 8 points. The first requirement for you to call yourself a qualified graduate is for you to exhibit one of the qualities stated on this slide. You need to demonstrate competence to engage in independent learning through well-developed learning skills and demonstrate your competence to design and conduct investigations and experiments. So some of you may be doing research which involve experiment. Some of you will be doing research which involve finding data, information, correlation, and modeling of that information to correlate cause and effect activities that we need to address in society. But in both cases, a graduate would learn to operate effectively and upon a body of knowledge sufficient depth to begin their professional practice. And the only way you could do that is to gain some understanding through research in areas which you graduate or educate, that is in the field or the disciplinary area. And in that process, you demonstrate that you can effectively contribute to knowledge creation and knowledge application. So that is the first graduate attribute that necessitates for a student to engage in research activities. Because at the end of the day, it is not the certificate that makes you a better graduate, but what you have acquired, imbibed in terms of some of these things we're talking about here right now. Now, I must apologize. Some of the terms include engineering, the word engineering, and vicariously comes from the fact that I normally give these lectures to engineering students. So the attribute number 2 is to demonstrate competence to use appropriate methods, skills, tools, including information technology, to perform creative, procedural and non-procedural design synthesis and components of systems and products and processes. So if you are architectural student or engineering student or fine art students, you will still be able to confidently perform these skills through research. And at the end of the day, you should be able to evaluate, manage, or use information in a range of contexts that could be classified as information literate on your skills and abilities. Third, you need to demonstrate the competence to identify or assess and formulate, solve convergent and divergent problems. So again, not only restricted to engineering students, but also to other disciplines, whether science or liberal arts or social sciences. And through the performance of research or execution of research, you will be able to demonstrate an effective problem-solving skills, capable of applying logical, critical thinking to a range of problems. And you can demonstrate that through research after doing it. There is also the requirement for you to be a team player or an independent worker. So there is the need as part of your training, whether undergraduate or postgraduate, to work effectively in a team setting or multidisciplinary environment, or as an individual who can autonomously or collaboratively perform as a professional person at the end of the day. So some of the activities we do in research is to help the students work with their fellow students on a common goal. So some projects we assign students to work in teams, but for others, we want them to get an independent experience with minimum or no supervision at all. And that is part of the research training that we need to give to our students. We're getting there. Number 5, we need to also act professionally and ethically, and to exercise judgment and take responsibilities within our limits of competence. We also need to demonstrate critical awareness of our activities striking impact on social, industrial, or physical environments that we build or operate in. So ethics is very important part of our training and our consciousness. And we have to be committed to ethical action and social responsibility when we take charge of research work and perform. And some of the research work may be involving animals, people, combination of these, and even if you generalize flora and fauna, we need to make sure we are very ethical about that. There is also the need to develop skills in communication, verbally, linguistically, and technical writing sense, right? And it should be able to communicate to audience of different backgrounds and the community at large. So part of the training is for the students to ensure that they are able to present to their peers, to the department and the faculty, so that when they go out in the real world to work for industry or the general public, inform the public debate, they can be very articulate and make sure they can be understood. So that's also very important. I think I got one or two more. Yeah, one, two more. Above all, the student should graduate with skills that encompasses project management. Because after finishing the degree, they might decide to work for a company, for government, or for themselves as sole traders. And their sense of business management or project management is very, very essential. And those skills have to develop within projects and multidisciplinary environments which their research may take them to. Lastly, but not the least, the graduate who has the world at large in their focus should be able to display the ability to think globally and consider issues from a variety of perspectives. So through the research, they need to undertake literature review, not just selecting articles or papers from people within the university or the institution or SADC region or Africa, but globally, and be able to appreciate and demonstrate the capacity to apply international standards and practices in the disciplinary area so that they can benchmark their work internationally or nationally and become relevant. And above all, they should recognize intercultural, interracial issues relevant to their profession and the practice of their profession. So that finishes that mandate which we are supposed to have as academics to educate and train our young ones. Now, we talk about the research journey itself. Anybody in the fourth year of a degree, which normally is the honors year for undergraduate, and also people undertaking postgraduate studies, whether master's, PhD, or postgraduate diploma. If you get to engage in a research, then these things I'm going to talk to you about apply. First of all, you have to get a researchable project and topic. And I'll explain that. You need to get supervisors. Typically, a principal supervisor, associate or co-supervisors, or in some universities, you need to get a panel of supervisors with one as the principal. So whatever you do, at least you need two, one being principal, one being co-supervisor or associate. Then, having got a topic that is researchable, you need to develop a proposal, whether you call it project proposal or research proposal, it means the same thing. Now, you have to have it in your the back of your mind, that the research proposal that you're going to develop would have to be approved, especially by the department higher degree research committee, and finally by the faculty level ADRC, if you are doing postgraduate. In some institutions, even for bachelor degree research, you have to face a committee as a student with your proposal to defend it before you can go ahead and have your candidature approved. So that is point number 2. Approval of the proposal is very important. The first question you ask, what is the research project anyway? Research project generically may be defined as a problem-based study which will lead to new body of knowledge, creation of knowledge, and greater understanding that will reflect useful decision outcomes. So what that means literally is that you create new knowledge, or you create greater understanding on an existing problem. And the definition of new knowledge, original knowledge, which is required in the case of PhD,
What are you?
Good.
would depend on whether or not you're doing masters or you are doing PhD.
When we went for the board meeting.
If you're doing PhD, originality of your finding or your created knowledge.
Because I was not there, so you must
just. Okay, let me send you the email.
Yeah, if otherwise just an
let me send you the email that he sent, because I sent you an email, and then he said, let me send you that email.
Can those people meet?
And I'll bring you my financial reports for review.
Somebody's mic is
December.
My participants, kindly mute your microphones.
Because there's a December color. Have you spoken to me about the...
Mute your microphones.
The meme before she went, she did a template for the report that needs to go to the PSC.
Can you kindly mute your microphone?
The one that we normally have, the auditor.
Kindly mute all the participants.
That they actually do with the financials. Because the one for the auditor's estimate is the USD part, and it's the one that is cutting every year when you come to the end of the year.
Professor Plans, is
the
it
PSC members, they didn't want.
Okay.
Should I continue? There's so much noise.
There's so much interference. We need to give us a minute to resolve it.
cumulative, but then we were contemplating, me and Luina, to say now what should we do. So we need to keep the accountability report still be done, but
Just
for
we are trying to mute
perhaps
them
this year.
from our.
Yeah, because BSc they don't want to see that one. It confuses them. Yeah. So I'll just bring you the new template and the balances from X3.
Okay.
Let me just check against those now.
And online, please, can you mute your microphone?
All right. I think the noise is down now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, I keep going. So the first thing to do is to get a researchable topic or project title that would contain relevant information to the reader as to what kind of project you will be doing. And I've given example of a few here. Now, there is a word count that generally people expect to keep as limits between 10 and 20 words. But regardless, it has to be something meaningful, relatable, short, sharp, and sweet. As indicated by 3 examples, the first one is to mine or not to mine Kimberley mineral reserves. Second one, precious metals recovery from electronic waste, both counting less than 10 words. And then you can have one that is a bit more bulky, improving flotation recovery of gold from refractory or ferrous sulfide ore using vegetable oils and collectors. So it can be as short as the first example or as long as the second one. As long as every word contributes to sending a very useful message they are in. Like I said, typically not more than 20 words. Example of one of my PhD students who finished 5 years ago. Simple topic, enhancing iron ore center feed granulation. Now, don't worry about the fact that it's only 6 words. The devil is in the details. So for stakeholders who read, especially mining companies or mineral processing organizations, these short titles are very exciting for them. So you get the title right. And then you go to your supervisor and you discuss what you need to do for the research, given that kind of topic. The next proposal development process includes covering introductory background, which largely involves relevant literature review. Defining in that process the problem statement and the significance and the justification for even spending $1 on that kind of research. And that should lead or feed into the aims and objectives with cognate research questions or testable hypotheses. So this is the beginning of the journey. Good topic, exciting, stimulating, and you, the researcher, whether bachelor, master's, PhD, or postgraduate diploma, has to do critical literature search on the topic. So what does the background, introduction, and problem statement involve? Well, this session must show the current scientific and technological state and advances. It must highlight the strengths and the weaknesses in the field with regards to the problem that has been presented for the research to be undertaken. And the trick here is for the student to identify what the rest of the world have done in terms of research related to that specific problem, which is the basis of their research, and demonstrate to the sponsors of the project that the questions that arise through their proposal literature review cannot be answered by the research done to date, by the information provided by the research done to date. In other words, there is persistence of paucity of knowledge and understanding for a solution to the problem, even as after finding 2, 3, or 4 weeks to search globally to see if somebody has answered those questions. So in the end, you justify the need for the research because you could not answer the pertinent questions which are the foundation for the problem to be solved. Then you talk about, if that being the case, what will be the aim and objectives? And I have particularized aim and objectives in capital letters, uppercase. And this is to place emphasis on the point which I'm going to make. That point is, very often people consider aim and objectives interchangeable or synonymous, but that is not the case because they talk about aim at the beginning of a sentence, and then by the end of it, they say, well, these are the objectives. So you have to specify aim as aim and objectives as objectives. And it might not be very clear to some students what aims and objectives are in terms of their differences. So I'll try to address that. Then when you have identified the objectives which support the aim, you can then interrogate the objectives by asking research questions and/or proposing testable hypotheses in support of both the aims and objectives. And the answers that you glean from the research to address those research questions in the end would constitute the expected outcomes and conclusions for the research work at the end of the day. So what does it take to write a good introductory background? Well, it requires you as a student or a researcher, if you like, assuming you are a staff, to review the literature related to the research topic. And specifically what that means is that you need to establish what has been done to date in this field of research by the rest of the world, so that it can be demonstrated whether or not there is a knowledge gap or no basis for the research. Then you come to the problem statement, its significance and justification. You need to demonstrate that, yes, indeed, after researching and reviewing the literature globally, there is an existing problem that has to be solved in order to answer the questions stakeholders have for supporting or funding the project. You need to also show how scientifically or technologically, economically or socially or environmentally this research is very important. The questions you need to answer includes who benefits from the research, who are the stakeholders, and if it's an industry or company or an organization problem, how and why is this research critical to the business of the organization? Then that would answer the significance and justification. And sometimes we as academics come up with research projects that we want the government to fund it with public funds. So we need to show society why taxpayers' dollars have to be spent on that kind of research. Some of the pertinent questions that has to be addressed in terms of significance is as follows. I have a set of them, about 8 of them. First one, will an identified knowledge gap be filled by conducting that research? Will a jigsaw puzzles of putting the pieces of information together occur so that at the end of the day, the puzzles all merge and create very clarified knowledge? Will contentious issues identified in previous research be clarified and laid to rest? For example, if somebody does a research in a pH range, to use a bit of chemistry example, and they show that between pH range 1 to 14, different researchers have found different performances of some tests they conduct. Somebody may investigate from 0 or pH 1 to 7, and somebody may investigate from pH 7 to 14, and they may get positively or negatively correlated events in their results. In other words, the person who gets positive correlation shows increasing pH increases the performance of that activity. And the one who gets negative correlation shows that beyond pH 7, you get decreasing performance with increasing pH. Now, if both have done it without knowledge of each other, each one can claim that, well, in my thinking, you can get an increase, but not a decrease. And the other one may also think the opposite. But if you put another researcher who investigate between pH 5 and 10, they might find a maximum. So that contentious issue could be resolved. This is a very simplistic example, but that's what I mean, contentious issues being laid to rest. Will previous research scope and depth examined by a previous student or a previous staff be extended? In other words, are we doing more of the same and not getting our money's worth? Or are we expecting complementary findings beyond what other people have done? Will the studies produce new design, new process, a new flow sheet, a new methodology, or dramatic improvements rather than incremental in industry? Are there related documented problems with available solutions for benchmarking or curve learning? And above all, we interpret the benefits in terms of dollar value gained for solving the problem successfully versus somebody says there's no merit, so we're not gonna get any value out of it, so we maintain the status quo. That is do nothing in terms of research. Okay, so we talk about aim. The reason why I say aims and objectives are not the same is that technically, when you talk about aim, is the main purpose of the research project being undertaken. And the objectives are a set of research goals and tasks executed to achieve the aim of the project. Then beyond the objectives, you could pick each one of the objectives and do reverse engineering and ask a counter research question. So if there are 10 objectives, the minimum set of research questions you could get will be 10. It can be higher because you may break some objective function into two parts. Then you either ask research questions or hypotheses, but you don't do both because the level of difficulty and becoming fully burdened researcher to do both will be not only duplication, but also time wasting. I'll give you an example. One of my PhD students wrote what you see on the screen as research aim. If you read it, and I'm not going to go through them word by word, but if you read it and you look at the objectives numbered 4 below, even if you are not a chemical engineer or metallurgical engineer, you can see the differences in the sense they make, distinguishing what we call aim from objectives. Now, I know in some campuses or universities, students tend to do objectives versus specific objectives. So they talk about objectives in terms of aim. And then when it comes to objectives, they talk about specific objectives. And there is no mention about aim. So I prefer to call aim as an aim and not interchange it with objectives or confuse it with objectives, which are different things. Now, the research questions, if you go back to the research objectives, which were 4, I could split each objective into 2 research questions, and that's what have been done on this sheet. So if you have this list of research questions, they go directly hand in hand with the objectives. By the time you do the research to answer each of the 9 questions, you have your thesis done. So this is the checklist, right? Being original and creating original knowledge as a contribution to the field. If you can address these questions in the particular case of this student, then you've done your job. Okay, so from the research aim, objectives, research questions, then the next cab of the rank is the approach and methodology. And we would also decode what the approach means and the methodology means. And the methodology has links with denominations, limitations, and assumptions. And then, of course, after all this, we follow up with expected outcomes, which are anticipated after doing all what we have described up until now. But it's very important that we are not here forever. And as PhD students, masters, or undergraduate students, time is the greatest resource, which you don't have plenty of. So you have to cut straight to the chase in most activities and use a time frame and timelines for execution and delivery of the research outcomes on time. When you make assumptions in your methodology, it might imply some risk, because what if your assumptions are not strictly valid? Are there means to overcome the anticipated risk? Or are the risks attainable? Denominations involve certain boundary, scope, time, space, and assessing the subject value perspectives. You have to look at the unit of analysis and what would not be covered. When it comes to limitations, you just have to address the shortcomings of the approach and methodology you have taken. So you be your own critic and recognize that, well, you've taken this approach and methodology. Are you fully capable to address the problem with the design of experiments or the design of questionnaire that you sure you covered everything and not left to yourself exposed to examine it? So look at the shortcomings and the limitations. Essentially, the research approach and methodology describe pivotal activities required to complete the project. You need to demonstrate knowledge of alternative methods that are available to addressing the problem or the issues in the project, and justify why a particular method is chosen. You need to anticipate from literature review what others have done, what kind of data will be collected and how. And if you're going to collect data, whether doing experiments or designing questionnaire for the population in Namibia, or for example, people in Windhoek to answer, or a sector of the community, you have to develop what we call SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. And I have to say this before I forget. When you develop standard operating procedure of collecting information, treating, or performing experiments and analyzing, please make sure you have discussions with your supervisors and get things right and approved. Because after 8 months, if it is found out that you use the wrong methodology or the wrong approach, or the steps were not followed properly, that body of knowledge and data collected will be useless and time wasting. So you have to develop a standard operating procedure at the beginning before you touch any research activity, so that you get approval and the go ahead. Where would the data be collected? In the field, in the lab, in the streets? For how long? And how easy would you have access to data collection? When we talk about research approach, we mean whether or not we're going to perform basic, strategic, basic, fundamental studies and or applied studies. Whether we're going to do experimental, theoretical, semi-empirical, which means we combine experience with theory. So we use experimental and theoretical approach together in semi-empirical. Is it going to be conducted, the research that is in the field, laboratory, or office for people doing some of these semi-empirical or theoretical work, which is office-based with computer? Are you going to use qualitative or quantitative approach? That has to be noted. Sampling. Are you going to do interviews and questionnaires? Are you going to take some material from the field and treat them and analyze, value add, or otherwise? What will be the sample size? Population versus sample. Is the sample size you take representative of the bigger population? You need to consider ethical considerations and compliance of the ethics. I've said it before, you make assumptions. Are they realistic? Are the conditions you presume to hold for testing or investigation valid? Expected outcomes and the contribution to knowledge that your research may bring. You could make an original contribution to creation and application of new knowledge that could lead to innovation. And although I haven't put it down, in certain countries, especially Australia, if you are engaged in master's or PhD student, you have to sign a research agreement with the university and your supervisor that if a very innovative idea comes about where an invention is created, who have the rights? The university, the student, or the supervisors? And different universities have different agreements and policies. But in Australia, if you're doing master's or PhD, within the first 6 months, you need to sign a research agreement in case, you develop a new way of making cars run on water, if you can. So who get the IP? Would the research contribute to greater understanding or just tactical solutions to an important industry or community problem? Above all, are you going to publish? You ask yourself, in prestigious journals in the field to advance the research and scholarship in the field? Or are you going to come up with a new theory or significant extension of existing theory, or just new knowledge and understanding, which albeit are of high scientific and technological value? With that, I have come to the first half of the seminar, and I would pause here and ask if anybody have questions for me to address. We have 15 minutes. So on the 29 slides I've shown, certainly people may have questions.
Okay, any questions online and in the room? Just indicate by raising your hand. There's a question here.
Okay, please shoot.
First of all, thanks for your presentations. I have a question. How we can find innovations in our proposal?
Can you repeat the question? How do you find innovation
in our proposal?
Well, you might not find innovations in your proposal writing per se, but there are cases where people have got an idea which they believe has got some innovation to it. So what they do is they approach a university if they are already not a student and discuss the possibility of doing a project, master's or PhD or diploma, to look into that concept. And that might be your best hint of innovation. Now, if you have an idea which is bright, and some students have done that, they have come to the university, spoken to somebody, and then have a research agreement written. And the idea was translated into a project which indeed turned out to be very innovative. And so there are some IP issues here and financial ramifications. Now, considerably, there's a large number of examples where serendipity has led to innovations. So the people had no idea whether or not there's going to be an innovative outcome. So just serendipity that brought that innovative product or concept up. But there is no theory for predicting what kind of research would give innovative solutions. Just the risk, the value proposition set. And there are cases where through series of refinements of that research, people can also predict they are on a path of an innovative solution, long-term persistent. But for a 2-year master's or 4-year PhD, it's touch and go. Like I said at the beginning, I've had 55 PhD students, 15 masters graduate with me. And only 10 times we have managed to get patents arising from the research. And these patents, up until now, I don't know about others, but I haven't got $1 out of it. All I get is companies funding research in that patent area. When they see it, they fund me, but I haven't become rich, and I don't intend retiring on innovations. But it's possible. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, of course. Well, I have another question.
Yeah.
If geographical gap could be significant to the project, proposal investigation.
Can you repeat the question? The volume is a bit low.
If a geographical gap could be significant to the investigation.
What should be my investigation? I didn't get that.
Okay. If a geographical gap could be significant to have a proposal for investigation of some subjects.
You are asking if
what he's saying is, I would like to make a amendment to just help him. He's saying is a geographical gap supposed to be used for some kind of yeah, so he's talking about a geographical gap, whether it can be significant in terms of the proposal.
Oh, so whether the person is doing the work in another location.
Yes.
And studying at another location. So if you are a student in Namibia and you are doing project with a professor in South Africa, is that what the geographical location challenge means?
Yes, it's that.
Okay. Well, I've seen even within NAST, students getting their masters and PhD with supervisors in other countries, UK or UCT or Johannesburg, Wits, where they make time to travel and get some work done. But it depends on the topics, because some of the research work you can do internally in Namibia or at NAST, whilst your supervisor may be located, who is an expert in that area, may be located in South Africa or Zimbabwe. So it is tough, but it's doable. One of my current PhD students at NAST is a staff at one of the universities in Zimbabwe. And we communicate frequently. So the geographic location impact is minimized. But of course, it would have been the best ideal situation to be able to sit with your supervisor in a coffee shop and brainstorm. But otherwise, it's doable readily with good planning. It shouldn't be a big problem. In this postmodern, you can connect people with Zoom, with Teams, face-to-face, morning, evening, and sometimes it's even better because you don't have to drive to campus or fly to South Africa in order to get engaged with a company or a supervisor. Any other question, please?
Yes, morning, Prof. Just an extension to what my colleague asked. When it comes to location, let's say someone does research in South Africa, but it's never been done here in Namibia. Then you adopt the entire methodology that guy used and use it here in Namibia. Would that qualify under innovation? Thank you.
You are asking, you solve a problem that is done in South Africa and try to extrapolate their findings to Namibia for application. Is that a question? Hello?
Yes, Prof, you're right. That's the question.
Okay. Well, if properly planned, I don't see any limitations in that approach, provided the relevancy of the two situations are established at the beginning. Now, we know that some of the work we do, if we do it in semi-empirical way, we can have the theory part of the research, which applies to every location on the planet Earth. So if the theory works in Namibia, it should work in Australia, South Africa, elsewhere. Now, the semi-empirical part, other than the theory, is the practice. If you are treating a sample of soil or rock or a material that is being generated in South Africa, but those equivalents in Namibia don't exist, that is, the same characteristics don't exist, then there is a mismatch. But however, if the same, within reasonable degree of variation, the same ore body or samples or disease exists in both countries, then although you base the research particularly on South African patients or samples, it can be extrapolated appropriately to Namibia. And I've done some work in Australia where some US government Department of Energy people have followed over the years, and I didn't know that. And They only told me because they applied the outcomes to their systems with due diligence and caution, and they got the expected results, which my body of work tells them, if you do this and do that, you get that. They did get that. But I also acknowledge that there are cases where you don't put round pegs in square holes or vice versa. There has to be the basis for extrapolation, because otherwise you may get wrong outcomes.
Morning, Prof. Sorry, I came in a bit late. I just wanted to ask, I remember during my MS, I had an issue with the transport of my samples to Europe. For whatever reason, I was surprised that my samples were not allowed to be shipped the other side. I just wanted to ask, how does really one predetermine or go around this issue of export of samples?
My friend, I'm glad you asked that kind of question. This is the business of quarantine and what do you call it? Those people at the borders of countries checking the importation of diseases and problems from other countries. If it is soil sample, just remember this, I told you. Even if you took it from 20 inches from the surface down, the requirement is that if you don't take it below 1 meter from the surface, it is not allowable by most jurisdictions as assessed by quarantine into that country. So sometimes you need to take surface soils or rocks, but most biodiversity groups or government biodiversity police at the borders will not allow you to take anything up to 1 meter depth from the surface. What they will allow you to take is below that depth. So I'm not trying to get you to be a crooked person, but you know what to do. If you fill the form and you said these samples were taken 5 meters deep below the surface, 9.9 out of 10, unless it contains maybe some radioactive or something that it's not permittable, then you'll be fine. But if you don't particularize that the samples were taken and you didn't even know that it has to be below a certain limit, then you'll be in trouble all the time. I've seen some samples turn away when people try to ship it to me in Australia. And when I explained it to them, the next time they were filling shipment forms, they knew how to present the information and get the samples in. So it's got to do with the depth where you take the samples. And how you package the samples as well. So if the samples are soil samples that contain fibrous material, it must be placed in hermetically sealed bags, right? Wrapped properly so there is no emission of inhalable particles. needless to say. And if it is radioactive, you need to measure, take the Geiger counter and measure 1 meter away from the sample and to see what level of radiation exposure. And it has to be very well labeled. That's my answer, my friend.
Okay, is there any other question from the room? It looks like there are no questions this side, and I can see online there's no one. Probably.
So we take the break?
Do you want to go for a break? Is it 10 minutes break?
Yeah, 5 minutes pit stop.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, let's break for 5 minutes, then we come back. This is 10:13, 5 by 10:17. We resume.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. It's 10:17. We resume. It's 5 minutes. I'm actually time conscious. So there's a question actually online. Maybe I should read it before we continue.
Yes, please.
Okay. The question is, what if a participant refuses to sign an informed consent form after he or she has been interviewed for a study, or the researcher struggles to get the signed informed consent form from the participant? Will the interview recording and transcript be sufficient evidence to the supervisor, doctoral school, that such person indeed was a participant in the study?
Well, ethically, if you interview a participant, somebody who elected to be a member of the group of people you are interviewing, and they fail to sign, giving sufficient reasons, I think it is not acceptable to include their responses in the survey or whatever information you are gathering. The reason for that is because this person is providing information which he cannot stand before any jury to say, I voluntarily offer that information and it's valid. And I'm lost for words to know why they agreed to participate in the interview, but failed to sign. And it could be for reasons unknown, but ethically, if they fail to sign to own up to that information, I think it has to be disregarded, sorry, not included.
I think it's clear. We can proceed, Prof.
Okay. I haven't given the overall view on what it takes to develop a research proposal. I'm now going to delve more into details of the fine-tuning of what I've said and executing each step, which is part of the value chain to get a proposal approved. As already mentioned, fourth-year research students undertake research projects, and they also take design projects. And it should be treated in the same manner as research projects. Masters and PhD students undertake higher degree research and come out with theses. Pardon me. For the former, it's 2 years on average. For the latter, 3-4 years, full-time equivalent for PhD. We know how and where to perform the research investigations in labs, offices, in the fields, with collaborating industry partners. There always have to be a lead investigator, the principal supervisor, and very often an associate or co-supervisors. That is the model in most countries and around the world. If you are an undergraduate student at NUST, you should have started your research by March, if not earlier. For those undergraduate students, you have to develop and write mini proposals by mid-semester of the first semester, conduct literature reviews, do experimental planning and methodology development. Plan for samples so you procure them. Make sure the equipment system for research is available. Then, if I use Department of Mining and Process Engineering, you do the testing in the second semester. But the things listed here that you have to undertake in the first semester is by no means trivial. It's very serious and time-consuming activity. So you complete them in the first semester, and in the second semester, you just have experimental design set up, all your raw material ready, hit the ground and run for the next 3 months. The students have to do presentations and submit written reports. Beware of deadlines, and it may differ from department or faculty to faculty. So I've said most of these things, that there are deadlines and reports that are due, both in the first semester and second semester. Let's look at the structure of the research proposal and final project report. You need to begin the story in chapter 1, the introductory background to the study, and show your mastery over literature in the review of all the published, peer-reviewed, and unpublished anonymous papers available, and summarize them. Make sure you cover, as already mentioned, problem statement, research aim, objectives, research questions, expected outcomes, and the significance and the contribution that you believe you can glean from the work. Define the research approach, methods, cover research ethics. And the other thing I need to mention, safety. Safety has to be taken care of also under research methods. Then you have all these experimental data which you will gather and analyze. These are not written, but it goes without saying. You have all the body of data you collected. You analyze, you correlate, and the analysis part has to be described clearly in the research methods section. And the type of experiments you're going to do have to be delineated under design, experimental design. All the variables, the conditions, the parameters that influence the outcomes of the research, all specified under methods and design. Then you have the results and the discussions. So the results present the experimental data in the first part. Now, data is data. Data is not results. Data is the raw information, primary information that you collect from experiments, from the field, from questionnaire interviews and all that. Unless you massage and analyze and interpret them, they are not results yet. So when we say results, you proceed with the raw data that leads to the results, and then you discuss. Now, remember, your literature review becomes handy in your resource and discussion part, because you need to cite and benchmark with similar studies or complementary studies in the field, whether or not your results are in agreement or are contradictory to those studies. And above all, you need to draw conclusions and recommendations for future work. And you need to incorporate bibliography or references. And there are standards for doing the bibliography or references according to each university. And citation of other people's work in your report or thesis has to conform to NATS standards, right? You have to conform to NATS standards. So the research proposal now is a document that presents a well-structured research strategy and a plan with a focus on solving a given set of problems as defined under research objectives. In general, the proposal can be 10 to 15 pages for undergraduates or close figure, depending on the advice and the nature of the problem at hand, but the advice comes from the supervisors. And for postgraduates, typically it's between 20 to 25 pages. It may take several weeks for undergraduates and few months for postgraduates to develop the research proposal. Like I said, time is a limited resource you don't have plenty of. Now, once you get the proposal approved by the internal departmental research degree committee, it has to go to faculty level. Now, when it is done at the faculty level, it goes to the Senate. And I've been at the Senate several times to know where some PhD proposals or master's proposals have been a frequent flyer. Come in, get rejected, come back, come in, get rejected. You don't want to be a frequent flyer. You want to polish it, make sure it's strong, and get good peer reviews, comments before it goes to the faculty level so that it does only one shuttle to the Senate and does not come back. Pardon me. We talked about project title being informative, lucid, but concise, reflecting the problem to be addressed in not more than 10 to 20 words. It's very important to remind people that I have read some theses, not mentioning research proposals, that have very poor standard of English. So if you have difficulty in writing your proposal, and that will meet the first test of Senate, because at the Senate, any obvious display of typos and grammar errors would send the proposal back another 3-6 months, right? So if you have writing problems, talk to your supervisor, talk to the English department staff for help, and seek help as early as possible. If you need an editorial help from a professional or the English department, communication department, please do. But writing the proposal and, for that matter, the end result, the thesis, requires good communication skills in just technical writing and oral presentation departments. These are absolutely essential features. In the introductory background, just to finalize what I've just said so far, the writer must show that he or she understands the existing problem that has warranted the proposal to undertake an appropriate research investigation. You must raise the reader's awareness of how important and significant the problem is. You must provide supporting evidence for knowledge gap. Don't just say there is knowledge gap and it will be believed. When you are writing the proposal, the literature review is preliminary because literature update is a lifelong exercise during the project life, right? So even if you get the approval from Senate to go on with the PhD, it doesn't stop there in terms of literature review. Keep updating till the last week you are about to submit the thesis. And the student should show in their thesis or their proposal the acquired mastery over the relevant literature information needed at the initial stage and at the final stage. In general, few paragraphs of up to 2 pages in length has to be written for the introductory background, right? And I have my usual catchwords: short, sharp, sweet, and lucid. It should be. Literature review. I must say that some students do due diligence in literature review to the point that at the end of their proposal writing, they are able to update the literature and publish a review article. 1 in 5 PhD students that I've supervised have achieved that. Now, in any field of research or specific area of research, every 5 years, literature review article is due. So you can watch out for your area of research. If the last one was done 5-6 years ago, and you're good in reviewing literature, which you must, then you can target this by upgrading your literature search and review report into a research article. There are journals which publish review articles anyway. And this literature review task requires extensive cognitive and linguistic understanding of the body of knowledge, emerging concepts, and other things in the field of study. So it's not trivial. How much literature review must you do? Well, you must review substantial number of published articles, books, handbooks, monographs, theses that have come before you. My caution is that beware of taking information from Wikipedia and other unedited sources. Just because it's published online doesn't mean it's correct. For 4th-year undergraduate projects, referencing like I do in engineering students' thesis requires at least 20 published articles. It can be higher, but minimum 20. With PhD, it can go 200, 300, or 50, depends on what is relevant and available. Preferably, most articles cited must be current, published within the last 5-10 years, or worst case, the last 20 years. For each article you review, you must identify and summarize areas of strength and weaknesses so that you get a fair criticism to give to the author. List of references. You should not put on your reference list any article that initially you read and documented, but never included in your citation during the thesis. If it is on the list, it has to be cited in the thesis. And you must use prescribed notes format. Now, when you review articles, beware of cut and paste syndrome. You just copy that part, sentence, paragraph of the work, slam it into your literature review page. That's wrong. Paraphrase, right? Because it's one thing even citing the person who wrote that statement. If you should cite verbally, verbatim, sorry, you have to include in quotes, right? Otherwise, you have to write it in your own language and not cut and paste. And if you don't acknowledge, because you don't want the reader to know it's not your own idea, you could be violating the plagiarism rule, right? So beware of that. And plagiarism includes text copied from a book, article, website, graphics, animations, other people's work, another student's work, even if it's your peers as a student, or anything that another person has intellectual input to which you didn't give him the credit. Plagiarism is a breach of ethics and contrary to university policies. It's an academic misconduct and it can be dealt with severely. In extreme cases, it can lead to expulsion. What about copyright law? If you cite more than 10% of somebody's work in a paper, then you should seek copyright permission. For example, if a paper has 10 figures and you cite it and you copy 2 of the 10 figures, it means that information you have leveraged 20% of the figures, and therefore you should seek the copyright permission from the journal, right? And 99.99% when you write to the journal, they give you the right without question or charge, free of charge. Nothing, it could cost you nothing. And within a week or two, you get the answer, right? So do not break the copyright law, whether published or unpublished. If the article is not published, go to the author. If it is published, most articles we relinquish our rights to the publisher. So everything written or created is covered by copyright by default, regardless of where or in what format it is published. The laws of the land lays out specific guidelines for use of information for the purpose of academic study and research, and you must comply with those laws. Because if non-compliance and breach of that law will mean legal action taken and punitive measures applied. So lastly, my point number 3 says, that is why it is very important to cite all sources of information, because imagine you take that practice without citation and copywriting serious, and you go to work for a company and the company gets sued because you were responsible for providing a page or information or a statement that would infringe on copyright law. So remember that if you use more than 10% of someone's work, ask copyright permission. We've talked about plagiarism, which is also a capital offense. So both copyright and plagiarism must be looked out for. Now let's talk about methodology. Once you've gone through the literature, you know what other people are using in their research methods for solving similar problems in the field. So we learn from other people's examples. And if you follow the literature, you can develop the best practice for doing your work by benchmarking with those who have published in that topic area before you. Now, you have to deal with new data, existing data, information, and analysis. You have to do research design and scheduling, putting timelines on things. You need to take into account the resources and the tools specified here: materials, techniques, equipment, analytical methods, computers, software, models, online literature. If you are doing experimental work, remember originality and new ways of collecting information, new data, but these data have to be replicated. And I'll talk about replication shortly. And the method of which you acquire these data and you analyze things have to be embedded in standard operating procedure. Therefore, you should think about how in the literature people have done correlation of data, reconciliation, modeling, simulation, and validation with statistical analysis and standard errors or standard deviations on the mean values when results were obtained by replicating data. Therefore, for all the findings, you need to elucidate and rationalize why they make sense or why they don't make sense. And we have to think about standard operating procedures, right? We also have to talk about occupational health, safety, and welfare, because some of the chemicals you may be dealing with may be toxic, carcinogenic, mutagenic, and radioactive, and all that. So you have to take care of them. You need to make sure you have good housekeeping practice, disposal of waste, safe and sound, and take charge, take control in the lab to be a good lab mate. Now, when you get data, there are two ways. One, you perform experiments within time t equals 10 minutes, you take sample. Now, suppose you have a suspension of mineral particles reacting in a tank. You take 50 ml syringes, 5, and at time t equals 10 or 20 minutes, you take 5 samples within a couple of minutes. Why? To be sure that you are capturing a representative sample. Those are duplicates and triplicates. or quadruplicates, right? Take it at the same time, 4 times, 3 times, 2 times. Then you analyze. What you get is values which you can average. But the variation you get in terms of the mean and the standard deviation is telling you about precision of the measurements. On the other hand, if you did that experiment today and repeated it on certain number of days separately, and you took at the same 10 or 20 minutes, the same sample timing on 5 different days, these are what we call replicates. Replicates. And they are used to determine reproducibility of the measurements. And it is that replicate that is absolutely important so that when you present your data, you could have standard error bars, right? Because if you were to design a brick and you're talking about calculating the yield modulus of a member of a beam, and you determine it once, how safe can somebody be when they drive over the bridge where your calculation was done only once? Dangerous, right? So you need to think about replicates, and therefore don't be too ambitious to draw a schedule where you have about 98 experiments to do because you had a factorial design with 3 levels and 5 factors or something, and you were so damn busy you could not replicate. You could not, reproduce or repeat the experiments on separate days for at least 3 or 4 times. That is not good. Now, I'm getting to the end. The standard operating procedure, normally, if you check on Google or any useful technical site, you have to write it down, how you do things, right? Example is given here. You have to write it down step by steps, what you exactly do, what reagents, what equipment are involved. All this is in the experimental procedure to collect data. And you cover up to 11 where health and safety measures are taken into consideration. And articles you read, which have done similar work, references, right? And some information you keep in appendices. And if you look at here, I wrote scope and application. What is this SOP supposed to do? And where should it be applied? So that is 1.0, and it's explained here, something like that, right? So if it is water analysis and you're using WHO standards and you follow the same procedure, do the same thing, right? If it is EPA method for analyzing cadmium or lead in the soil, follow the same procedure and document so that you will not be found wanted. Thank you. I think I'm running out of time. So just in time.
Thank you, Prof. The floor is now open to everyone, those online and those who are physically here. But there's one question on online on the chat. I think someone asked earlier before we continue. In terms of literature review, what if the PhD is a continuation of a master's degree already completed? Are you allowed to use the same or similar literature review if it is correctly referenced, or must you do a completely different literature review?
Okay, that's a good question. I've seen that a number of times in my time. Now, most students update their literature monthly basis. And when you finish the master's, before you do PhD, in fact, by the time you submit your thesis, which is 3 months before the award of the degree or 4 months, if you go to Google Scholar, lots of articles are coming in. And every day, new ideas and new articles are published. So my quick answer is, whatever you had in your master's is a seed, but you have to build on, because knowledge is very dynamic, and in some fields, within a year or 2 or 3, the scenario is populated with very, very creative and new knowledge gleaned from articles. So yes, you don't chuck, or that is proper English, you don't throw away the information you had 2 or 3 years earlier from masters, but you have to seriously upgrade and show, on the grounds of extending the work to do PhD, what do you know that is new, that the rest of us don't know? What do you think is necessary for you to spend another 2-3 years getting another degree of higher level? You must have very good, compelling reasons for doing the PhD, justifiably so. And so you need to recast the literature and show that even after your work, which is in the same area, there is new questions and depth of knowledge that to be filled. And like I said, every 5 years, people write peer review articles just based on literature update. So yes, it is expected for you to seriously upgrade. But again, in some fields, there is proliferation of articles in large numbers monthly, others very limited. But albeit, you need a significant upgrade. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think you have answered it. Any questions from the room? I don't see any hand online, so. Are you guys fine? Or you are confused? Or there's too much information, you don't know where you start from.
Doctor, can I just say, I've emailed you the presentation slides.
Yes, I've seen it.
You can share it with anybody who is interested.
All right, thank you very much.
So they can sit back and reflect on those things.
Yeah.
And if they have questions, they can email me.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. I think let's give the hand of applause to Prof. A job well done. I think he gave us more than we expected. Thank you very much, Prof, for taking your time. We know you are very busy, but you tried your level best to squeeze us in your busy schedule. We appreciate the support. This afternoon, those who be interested, we have another seminar. It's going to be purely on literature review. So we are zooming in. I think Professor gave us an overview of the project proposal. So this afternoon, we are just going to zoom in the literature review, and our speaker will be from the University of Free State. So please, you join us online, those who are interested, and let's come early. We start exactly 2 o'clock. So thank you very much for those who joined us. We hope to see you in our follow-up seminars.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.